Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me in this Congress. This presentation covers some of the research I've recently done on the history of agriculture museums. Here, I focus especially on the origins and creation of the International Association of Agricultural Museums, known by the abbreviation of its French name as the AIMA. This association presents itself as an ideal case study for the examination of the transnational history of agricultural museology, with special attention to the establishment of knowledge networks, the role of experts, the transfer of theories and concepts, and the emergence of common policy issues. Founded in 1966 in Czechoslovakia and involving actors on both sides of the Iron Curtain, the AMA started in that same year to organize international congresses, which were alternately held by West and East Bloc countries every 2 or 3 years. These international congresses attract a multitude of experts, ethnographers, historians, geographers, agricultural scientists, and even the occasional museum professional. For the study of the proceedings of these congresses, published between 1966 and 1989, one can access an important narrative source of the ideas, plans, and ambitions of museum professionals and historians of agriculture throughout several decades. My research was also based on publications by international organizations concerned with cultural and even specifically museological issues, such as UNESCO and ICOM, International Council of Museums. Having presented the framework of my research, let us now take a step back in time to the early days of agricultural museology. As many other kinds of museums, the origins of agricultural museums can be partially found in late 19th century world exhibitions. Among the many institutions started in the aftermath of these events were two that were especially influential: the Skansen Open Air Museum in Stockholm, an innovative folklore museum, and the Hungarian Agriculture Museum in Budapest, a national museum with a markedly technical character, both founded in the 1890s. These were pioneer institutions which acted as role models for later initiatives around Europe and beyond. Oh, sorry, got it. Here you can see photos of a couple of exhibition rooms at the Hungarian Museum and a display prepared by Hezelius, the founder of the Skansen, at the World Exhibition in the 1870s. But we'll focus our attention on a third institution, the Czechoslovak National Agricultural Museum, which took shape immediately after the independence of the state in 1918 and was partially based on the example of the Hungarian Agriculture Museum. The positivist spirit of its curators and directors meant that its exhibitions were not considered as an ethnographic nostalgic display of artifacts, but as a practical educational tool to be used in the technical development of these new independent states. Notice how at the Czechoslovak Museum the emphasis is on the display of matters such as animal and plant breeding. In states where modernization advanced at a faster pace, agricultural museums were often retrospective in its content and closely associated with ethnographic and folklore collections, such was the case in Scandinavia and some other countries in Western Europe. Central European states, newly independent after the First World War, saw things differently, and modern, rather than traditional agriculture, was underscored. While open-air museums could build on the cachet of well-established fields of research and had increasingly become popular as recreational spaces, museums focused on the history of agricultural technology struggled to assert themselves outside of Central Europe. It is in this context that the early roots of the AIMA can be found. If we consider this association as one more transnational organization concerned with agricultural matters, one can easily integrate it into a long tradition of expert conferences and societies dating back to the late 19th century. Moreover, interwar Czechoslovakia was the site in 1927 of the creation of the Green International, a league of European agrarian parties. Significantly, Czechoslovak politics were, in those years, dominated by an agrarian party. It is thus unsurprising that Czechoslovak museum professionals, supported by agrarian-minded politicians, starting in the 1930s, flouting the idea of creating an international organization of agricultural museums, promoting a first survey of these kind of institutions. The project was postponed sine die by the Second World War when several Central and Eastern European museums of agricultural technology were destroyed, damaged, or dispersed. Now we have a map. This map represents the institutions mentioned in the surveys organized by the Czechoslovak Museum. The points are placed randomly within the countries and do not indicate the exact location of the institutions. The dates, when indicated, are those of the foundation of the museums. Across the icon, as seen in Germany, Poland, and Russia, indicate institutions that did not survive Second World War. This map is not intended to be an exact representation of agriculture museums in 1960s Europe, but as an illustration of the network of institutions that the Czechoslovak Museum knew of and interacted with in Europe. Albeit occasionally interrupted by political vicissitudes throughout the 1950s, increasing contacts between agricultural museums allowed for the organization of conferences, meetings, and field visits involving the staff of different institutions around Central and Northern Europe. This was made possible by the common interest of museums of technical agriculture and open-air museums in the history of cataloging agricultural implements and the history and cataloging of agricultural implements, a meeting point of ethnologists, agricultural engineers, and historians. These photos showcase the common interest in the history of agricultural implements in both Eastern and Western Bloc institutions. In this case, the Czechoslovak Museum and the Museum of English Rural Life, the MERL, that is hosting this congress today. The creation of the Aima resulted from the cooperation between the Czechoslovak and the Hungarian Museums of Agriculture. The latter, considered as one of the oldest and most comprehensive in the world, gave considerable credibility to the project. Zdeněk Tempík, director of the Czechoslovak Museum and one of the founders of the Aima, chronicled its creation as a continuation of the museum's interwar project and the triumph of international cooperation at a time of political division. However, Ted Collins, who attended many of the early congresses as a representative of the MERL, remarked that most papers were unimaginative and concerned familiar agricultural history themes, with possible divisive topics like socialist agriculture or farm collectivization being mostly absent from the congresses. Collins further noted that disagreements between Western and Eastern delegations sometimes occurred, particularly in what concerned the administration of the association. This map indicates the countries in which AIMA congresses were organized between 1966 and 1989. The statutes of the AIMA were jointly written by the staff of the Czechoslovak Museum and Gunther Franz, director of Hohenheim University's Institute of Agricultural History in West Germany. It is quite noticeable that there was an attempt to balance the influence of Western and Eastern Bloc institutions inside of the association. Interestingly enough, Soviet representations to the congresses were small and unremarkable, and Russian, despite being joined with English, French, and German, one of the official languages of the organization, was hardly ever used during the congresses. Based on Koleval examples, this can be attributed to the reluctance of the Soviet state apparatus in allowing the access of its museum professionals to academic events taking place in the Western Bloc. This situation was something that distressed Tempir and other Eastern Bloc professionals who strove in the early years of the association to maintain a strict balance between both sides of the geopolitical divide. Nothing was left to chance. For example, the structuring of the AIMA as an independent organization affiliated with ICOM, but not as an ICOM committee, was a deliberate choice. This maximized opportunities for Eastern Bloc museum professionals to take part in international meetings where they would have otherwise been replaced by government officials. They had thus successfully created a transnational network over which they kept a reasonable level of control, providing them access to publications, travel opportunities, and an international cachet of respectability that could even be mobilized in the context of negotiations with state apparatuses. Knowing this, it is easily understandable why Eastern Bloc national museums of agriculture with a strong technical emphasis remain one of the main components of the association up to 1989. This did not discourage Scandinavian and Western European ethnology or open-air museums from taking part in the association, but conflicting perspectives on museum work, as well as occasional political constraints, led to the creation of Western Bloc-based competing organizations focused specifically on these kind of institutions. Of course, that the 1970s and 1980s brought some changes to the thematic focuses of the congresses, as well as the membership and structure of the Aima. Nevertheless, 1989 appears to have been the real turning point for an association which had been imagined in a geopolitical context that was no more. Thank you for your attention.